In 363 AD, priests from Koinobi, Egypt, released 42 mystery books, and one released unofficially, the 43rd, was the most jealously guarded, for it contained the teachings of their most prominent initiate, Jehosuah Ben Nazaria, entitled Maggia Jesu Christi. The other 36 of these books from the Koinobi priesthood predate the Great Flood, and 6 contain the knowledge of Hermes, called the Hermetic Wisdom. Books that form the future steps, sigils, symbols, and myths of the Koinobi priesthood of Egypt, which established the secret Freemasonry knowledge. As you will come to see, all of this secret knowledge has been guarded by the Freemasons as jealously as the priesthoods that Jehoshua so famously rebuked. But not just the Judean priesthoods, also the Egyptian and Greek priesthoods of his day. Jehoshua not only bested them all in his mastery of the secret knowledge, but is their greatest rebel to date. He desired to lift the veil of their secrecy and make the secret priesthood knowledge public, only for the Freemason Brotherhood to collect and cloak in secrecy once again, like the new priesthood. This is the secret knowledge Jehoshua desired to reveal, and the Masonry framework. The man we call Jesus Christ, according to the Jewish version of his birth, recorded in the Sefer Toldos Jeshu, in the following words, was born to Mary, having become the mother of a son named Jehosuah Ben Nazaria. As a boy growing up, she entrusted him to the care of the Rabbi Elhanan, for Jehoshua was well gifted with spirit and understanding, and the child progressed in knowledge. Rabbi Jehoshua Ben Parakhiah, of the same first name but no actual familial connection, continued the education of Jehoshua after Elhanan, and initiated him in the secret knowledge of the Kabbalah. When initiated, Jehoshua was said to be knowledgeable in the first degree, and called a 1-year-old a babe or lamb, though now an adolescent. But the king, Jannaeus, the second king of the Hasmonean dynasty, who ruled over an expanding kingdom of Judea from 103 to 76 BCE, having given orders to slay all the initiates of the first degree, or 1-year-old babes, Rabbi Parakhiah fled to Alexandria in Egypt, taking the Nazarene boy with him. An incident during the Feast of Tabernacles was a major factor leading up to the Judean Civil War. It is recorded that during the Jewish holiday Sukkot, King Alexander Jannaeus, while officiating as the high priest at the temple in Jerusalem, demonstrated his displeasure against the Pharisees, whom included the Nazarenes, by refusing to perform the water libation ceremony properly. Instead of pouring it on the altar, he poured it on his feet. The crowd responded with shock at his mockery and showed their displeasure by pelting him with yellow lemons used in their rituals. They made the situation worse by insulting him. They called him a descendant of a captive woman and unsuitable to hold office and to sacrifice. Outraged, he set out to kill 6,000 people. While in exile in Alexandria, Egypt, Jehoshua passed his early youth with the Koinobi, known as the home to the secret Pythagorean school and Egyptian roots of modern Freemasonry. They were received in the house of a rich and learned lady, which is Egypt personified. The young Nazarene Jehoshua found her beautiful, without a defect in her eyes, and declared so to his master, Rabbi Parakhiah. Upon learning this, his master became so angry that his pupil should find in the Mosaic land of bondage anything good that he cursed him and drove the young man from his presence. Then follow a series of adventures told in allegorical language and retold and represented in the first 33 cards of the tarot, during which time Jehoshua supplemented his knowledge of the Jewish Kabbalah with the additional acquisition of the secret wisdom of Egypt. Having been trained in the exoteric, meaning public, rites, symbols, and rituals of the Kabbalah since childhood, Jehoshua learned the esoteric, meaning secret mysteries lying concealed in the Jewish Kabbalah after getting initiated in the Greek mysteries of office at the Temple of Osiris as practiced by the Koinobi priesthood. The Greek office is represented as the Egyptian uraeus, which are the one and same caduceus staffs of Isis, Osiris, and Thoth, who united are this hieroglyphic. Is translated by the letters PTR, pronounced the Petra, called the Eye of Horus, and form the Egyptian Trinity. Ophis, or uraeus, appears as two serpents standing erect on their own tails with the lion's head crowned and radiating, and bearing on the point of each ray one of the celestial spheres, or chakras, the planetary counterparts within the human body. And the astronomical correspondences of Eucus, the snake handler, Ophis's counterpart in the heavens. The sun passes through this constellation on the days between November 30th through December 17th. And if your birthday falls in these dates, you are in Ophiution and are meant to sublimate or handle your inner serpent in this life. When the persecution of King Alexander Jannaeus ceased, Rabbi Parachiah and Jehoshua returned to Judea. All credible and non-religious commentators have agreed that a literal massacre of young children is nowhere mentioned in history, and that moreover, an occurrence like that would have made such a bloody page in the Roman annals that the record of it would have been preserved for us by every author of the day since then. Herod himself was subject to the Roman law, and undoubtedly he would have paid the penalty of such monstrous crime with his own life. Such would be the judgment of the noble Roman Empire our civilization, so esteems in high regard. Right? But on the other hand, we have not the slightest trace of this fabled massacre of literal one-year-old children under Herod in history. But of the one-year-old babe initiates, or lambs, of the mystery schools under King Jannaeus, and the Jewish civil wars meant to form a Jewish state by slaying initiates of mystery schools? Most certainly. The real grievances against Jehoshua start in Egypt and are two in number. First, that he had discovered the great mysteries of the Osiris temple, where the mysteries of the Greek Pythagorean schools were blended with the Egyptian mysteries of Osiris, by having been initiated in Koinobi, Egypt. And second, that he had profaned them by exposing them to the public, or the vulgar, or profaned, who misunderstood and disfigured them. This is what they say. There exists in the sanctuary of the living God a cubical stone on which are sculptured the holy characters. The gates of the temple were never lost sight of, and the door of the sanctuary opened but once a year, to admit the high priest alone. This stone is watched by two lions of gold who roar as soon as it is approached. But Jehoshua, who had learned in Egypt the great secrets at the Ophite initiation, forged for himself invisible keys, and thus was able to penetrate the sanctuary unseen. Unable to displace the cubical stone of the sanctuary, Jehoshua copied the characters on the cubical stone and hid them in his thigh, after which, emerging from the temple, he went abroad and fabricated one of clay, which he showed to the Chaldean nations, and passed it off for the true cubical stone of Israel, personified by Saturn, in the heavens, upon whose pole is a six-sided hexagon, from which a 3D cube can be rendered, and is the Islamic black cube in Mecca, from which is derived the six-pointed star of David, the Buddhist spirals of peace, the cross, and so on. And Saturn was the head of the original pagan Jewish pantheon, called Israel, because all Jews are Kabbalists, but not all Kabbalists are Jews, as we will see, in the case of the Nazarene sect of Jehoshua. The combination of the cubical stone etched with the holy characters give the explanation of the attributes and powers of the incommunicable name, and Jehoshua began astounding people with his miracles. The dead were raised at his command, the leprous and the insane were healed. Jehoshua also wrote books concerning magic, which he delivered to John. He wrote a work called Maggia Jesu Christi, which concerned itself with the serpent, Ophite key of Osiris. He forced the stones which lay buried for ages to rise to the surface until they formed a mountain with a cave enclosed, from whose interior on the mountain top he preached his Sermon on the Mount. Jehoshua said, "Upon this Petra I will build my church, and the gates and the rulers of Hades shall not prevail against it." Meaning by Petra, the rock temple, literally and metaphorically. It was a literal rock temple, or cave in a mountain which he propped up using the magical cubical stone, from which he preached his Sermon on the Mount, though not out in the open, but from inside and behind a curtain, as will be shown, is just as Pythagoras had done when instructing Socrates. It was also this cave or Petra rock temple. His dead body was entombed, and 3 days later the site of Jehoshua's resurrection, but more on that later. In Egypt, Petra is represented by these 3 letters, PTR, translated from a group of hieroglyphics on a stela, which is this sign, which is the mystical counterpart to the letters and the word Petra, meaning to show, or the eye of Horus. And this eye is only open through the trinity of Osiris, Isis, and Thoth, whose staff is the serpent caduceus. The Koinobi mystery school, which blended the Greek Ophite serpent key with the Egyptian eye of Horus, discovered it was all a medical allegory for the exact shape and representation of the inner claustrum of the brain, which houses the pineal gland, and how to open and activate this pineal gland. Upon performing autopsies on their departed members, who religiously devoted their bodies to the science of pineal gland activation even in death, discovered that the activated pineal gland turned from a gray bony lump to a green pearlescent micro-sized pine cone that glistened like a crystal, or the emerald tablet of thought. And the activation of this emerald gland was found in the very tip of the spine, hidden deep in the region of the coccyx, which is actually below the start of the caduceus staff. It is the home of the original seed, or the first cell before mitosis, which is never killed or destroyed for as long as the body lives, and is thus called the original essence, or by the Greeks, the blood of Christos, and is shaped like this, a vessel, a grail, or the Holy Grail. The essence entrapped in the first seed must travel in a serpentine crawl up the spine like a snake, which is essentially the blood of Christ, which is born from the serpent seed, which must snake its way up the 33 vertebrae of the spine, which bears upon its column the points of each ray of the caduceus rays, or chakras, which are the 7 inner fires that release the smoke of old energies through the chimney of the spine. When Thought's emerald tablet is activated by the energy released from the Holy Grail, or serpent seed, one blends their humanity with the divine, capable of great things, and, though to commoners they'd be called magic, miracles, or heresy, to the learned, like Jehoshua, it was merely science. All of which are the myths, legends, and cornerstones to the knowledge and wisdom of Freemasonry, summed up as simply the serpent science. And this is the ineffable name, the signet of the living God, otherwise called the tetragrammaton, which Jehoshua discovered became unlocked, and all the occult natures and forces of God were revealed with the Ophite serpent key. And why it was the forbidden fruit. Yet, he did not just eat from it. Jehoshua set out to share this forbidden fruit, feed others from it, and thereby give them the knowledge and free them, because knowledge is power. And no truer knowledge exists than knowing God, and knowing God is already in oneself, saves oneself, It is the true salvation. It is the greatest wisdom, called serpent wisdom, which alludes to Jehoshua's favorite and often repeated saying, "Be ye wise as serpents." This is the ineffable name of God, which Jehoshua, known as Jesus Christ, unlocked with the signet of the manifested God, or caduceus, or in its simplest form, the Tau, which represents the four corners of the world, which when connected with straight lines draws a celestial equilateral square around the world, called squaring the face or squaring the circle. The quantifiable, orderly, measurable square makes the irrational chaos of the circle rational and orderly, thereby allowing humanity to make precise calculations about the spherical nature of Earth, like its diameter and radius, but also became the roots of sacred geometry, which can be used for celestial calculations and measurements of the universe beyond Earth. It is also the basis of music, mathematics, the Fibonacci sequence, and language, essentially revealing knowledge about the unseeable occult forces of God present everywhere the human looks, and the world within the human. The Pythagorean music of the spheres comes from this, so too Hindu, Buddhist, Egyptian, Mexican Aztec, and Olmec cosmogony, and even the African Dogon tribe of Mali. A basic tenet of the tetragrammaton and Freemasonry is as above, so below, and as without, so within, and everything in the heavens has its correspondence within the human, because every human is a mind, and every mind is a universe, because we all exist in the universal mind of God, the tetragrammaton. The tetragrammaton is the mind of God and your mind, and as there are planets in the heavens, there are chakras, their human counterparts, in you. All of which is the meaning behind the Tau or the cross symbol, for which there is a Masonic tradition to build upon three of these crosses, forming the triple Tau, or three crosses, and the origin for the Masonic signet. In its mystical sense, the Tau, or Egyptian cross, in the tetragrammaton is the secret key of all the occult sciences and forces, the cornerstone of Freemasonry knowledge, mythology, and construction, the same knowledge of Moses and his own magical serpent staff, and of the Mexican Quetzalcoatl, all of which are serpent science. This key, called the Ophite Serpent Key or the caduceus, unlocks the rest of the tetragrammaton, or shared mind between you and God, the knowledge known and kept secret by the ancient priesthoods and the Freemasons today as simply Maggia Jesu Serpens, the magical serpent science. Jehoshua also wrote books concerning magic which he delivered to John, the work called Maggia Jesu Christi, which was attributed to Jehoshua himself, being his best codex. And the charge was brought against Jehoshua that he did not perform his miracles as a Jewish prophet, and again, why would he? He wasn't Jewish but a Kabbalist, but as a magician, i.e. an initiate of the heathen Hierophant temples. The accusations against Jehoshua of practicing the magic of Egypt were numerous and at one time universal in the towns where he was known in Judea. It was said Jehoshua could fly as easily in the air as others could walk on earth. Jehoshua said, "Upon this Petra I will build my church, and the gates and the rulers of Hades shall not prevail against it." Meaning by Petra again the rock temple or mountain cave, literally and metaphorically. It was both the location from which he would preach his own knowledge in his Maggia Jesu Christi, which combined the Nazarene Kabbalist code with the Horus Ophite serpent science. All things, says the Nazarene Codex, are derived from one great principle, and this principle is the unknown and invisible God. From him a substantial power immediately proceeds, which is the image of God, Christos, and the source of all subsequent emanations, serpents. Matter is the most remote effect of the emanated energy of the deity, which swim like fish and crawl like snakes through the feminine menstruum. Here we find the trinity of Christos, the active force, the feminine menstruum or passive force, and the serpent or androgyne force, the father, mother, and child, respectively. The appellation of Nazarene, which Jehosuah bore, came not only from his father's residence in Nazareth, but from his affiliation with the sect of Nazaria, the healers. The oldest Nazarenes were the descendants of the scriptural Nazars, otherwise known as the connections, the Naz, to the Arya, the Nazaria. Which was but one region home to the roots of this once global serpent universal knowledge, along with the ancient giant pyramid builders of Chem, known as Egypt, of Atlantis, now known as the land off Mexico with its many Atlan-based names, onward connecting to Africa, and the pyramids that dot Africa, the Americas, China, Russia, and the Arctic poles, and whose last prominent leader was John the Baptist, and afterward fled Judean Jewish persecution. Even Herod regarded John as a prophet, which indicates Jehoshua's true ripe age, as he fled the persecution of the fledgling Jewish state under King Jannaeus, and lived long enough to know King Herod. In fact, Jehoshua suffered the obscene torture at the ripe age of 78. The reason the tarot itself ends upon the 78th card. The early Gnostics believed too that Jehoshua was a true prophet. The meaning of the word Nazar signifies to vow to consecrate oneself to the service of God. This God is the first cause, or Christos, that emanates its forces as serpents or fish through the feminine menstruum. The active father electric force, which spawns from the passive ether of mother, and the magnetic force. The electromagnetic androgyne child, who moves through the invisible menstruum like a crawling snake or swimming fish. But God is not one of them. God is all of them. So, to understand the unity of God, or the quaternary, or cubical stone, as God is the fourth from which the Trinity emerges, one must understand the equality and oneness of the Trinity of the other three, not splice them, rank them, and then just erase one entirely because you're a misogynist. Or misname the Trinity as God. For God is more appropriately the quaternary. It was this Kabbalist understanding the ancient Nazaria or Nazarias initiated their future healers like Jehoshua inside the Nazar or temple, which were but the secret mysteries of serpent science initiation, which Jehoshua truly understood when he got their secret meanings revealed to him in Egypt. This Nazarene sect is known to have existed some 150 years BCE, during the times of King Jannaeus and King Herod, close to 100 years prior to the supposed New Testament accounts. This sect was also known to have lived on the banks of the Jordan and on the eastern shore of the Dead Sea, and thus the Dead Sea Scrolls, amongst which the Gospel of Mary Magdalene is paramount, is attributed to them. The Nazarenes were baptized in the Jordan and could not be baptized elsewhere. The Nazars were prophets trained in the ancient wisdom of their founder, Zoroaster, and was the supreme chief magi from the ancient land of Arya, which after the biblical and very real deluge re-established itself in India, where Zoroaster gained his knowledge and brought it to Persia, which makes sense that there would be 3 Magi at Jehoshua's birth. He was already among them, destined to be one of them, and they no doubt were privy to the secrets of the Trinity of 3, thus showing up as 3 Magi at this future Magi's birth. Zoroaster established the knowledge of ancient Atlantis, Chem, Arya, Mexico, all one and the same. In Persia, Zoroaster was the instructor of the Greek Pythagoras, who brought the ancient knowledge to the Greeks, who later established a mystical school in Koinobi, Egypt, blending both the Greek and Egyptian mysteries, both of which echo the Kabbalah. It was with the Koinobi Jehosuah the Nazarene received his education in their dwellings in the desert, and was duly initiated in the mysteries of Ophis at the Temple of Osiris and the predecessors of Freemasonry. But he preferred the free and independent life of a wandering Nazaria, thus becoming a traveling Nazar or healer. The Nazarenes loved one another, entered one another's homes, even strangers', as though visiting a long-lost relative, embracing them as though to recover all that lost time, and more than other Jewish sects, which were themselves disjointed and pagan at this time, yet branching from the same tree of Kabbalah. Neglected wedlock, deeming the conquest of the passions to be more virtuous than marriage. Which is why he never married Mary Magdalene, even as a 78-year-old, but preferred her above all others. Mary herself was Mary of Magdala, from the region called Magdala, and was the learned and well-to-do daughter of the high priest, or Hierophant, of Magdala, herself initiated and well-learned in the mysteries of this fishing community. Thus, a high priestess herself, and a suitable match for Jehoshua in the literal and mystical. The Nazarene Codex also taught, "Thou shalt not worship the sun, or serpent, or fish, or androgyne child, who is named Adonai, also Kadosh, Yahweh, Jehovah, also called the phallic gods, or Baal. This phallus Baal Adonai will elect to himself a nation to congregate in crowds because he loves his worship to be exoteric, flashy, and pompous. Jerusalem will become the refugee city-state of the abortive, not the chosen, who shall perfect themselves through circumcision with the rusted sword and foggy mirrors of the phallic Adonai Baal." All religions born from this Baal Adonai are in Jerusalem, and all believe themselves to be chosen and practice circumcision to indulge the phallic Baal. Chosen indeed, and fooled all the same in oh so many ways. Did Jehoshua, the healer, the Nazarene, ever pronounce the name of Jehovah Adonai? Did he ever place the supreme soul of the first cause in contrast with the severe and cruel judge, the phallic Baal Yahweh? In fact, the Nazarenes had a name for the phallic god of the Jews, Ildaboath, the evil serpent, or demon. Jehoshua's God of mercy, love, and justice, never from the memorable day when he preached his Sermon on the Mount in his Pythagoras-inspired cave to his death and resurrection, ever compared his God, the first cause, the unity, and the all, with the Judeo-Christian Jehovah of destruction and retaliation, because to Jehoshua, Jehovah Adonai was an emanation, a serpent, a fish, or androgyne child, born from the same feminine menstruum, mother, and Christos father, just like him, a cow, a pig, a bird, all of which are equal to each other and to Jehovah Adonai, except he has proven to be neither a pig or animal, but an evil serpent, or Ildaboath, the demonic phallus and Baal. The language of Jehoshua is unequivocal. It implies not only rebellion but defiance of the God of Moses and Abraham's Lord God, the phallus and Baal. Puns intended. From the Bible, you have heard Jehovah tell us that it hath been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you, that ye resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. You have heard that it has been said by the name Lord God on Mount Sinai, thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thy enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them who despitefully use you and persecute you. Yet, if not the Jehovistic God Jehoshua of Nazareth preaches and teaches about, who is he talking about? What is he talking about? This golden rule of supreme love was not original to Jesus. In this current cycle of humanity, after the biblical deluge or Great Flood that ended the ancient civilization of the giants of Atlantis, Aria, the Mexican Nagual, and Chem, the next birthplace or inheritors of the true Jesus Christ knowledge was India. The Hindus taught to return good for evil, known as the Golden Rule, at the heart of Jesus Christ's teachings. But the Abrahamic Jewish Mosaic command is an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. One is love, the other hate. These are clearly two separate spiritual philosophies, and his career as a public rabbi was long enough to prove Jesus Christ established a regular school of his own. Located in the rock temple upon the mountain he rose from a valley he called Petra Roma, or, in its literal sense, translated as the Hindu rock, both referencing and paying reverence to the Roma, or traveling Hindi people of South Asia, to teach of the Petra, and, with the exception of John the Baptist and Mary Magdalene, it does not seem that others had fully grasped his teachings in the purest sense, though they were clearly both intended to continue initiating others. And as you all know, Christians had different plans for them. One was beheaded, the other prostituted against her will, literally. The apostolic designation Peter is itself from the mysteries, as already highly hinted. The Supreme Pontiff, Hierophant, or High Priest, also bore the title as the Interpreter, Interpreter, or Intrapetra. When the divine Christos joins the humanly serpent, or fish, it is represented in Hierophant initiations as the two stone tablets, or commandments, or the wisdom of the wine and bread, the Eucharist. The Christos, the wine, or blood first contained in the Holy Grail, and the bread, the serpent, or fish, or serpent seed that contains it. The wine, the Christos, or blood of the first cause, and the bread, emanation, or serpent and fish, which arise from and unite in the feminine menstruum, called the Petroma, the invisible feminine temple, the womb, or the church of the Peter Roma. Sound familiar? These are the true pagan origins of the Christian Church, found dead on the rock of Peter, found dead indeed, but without any of the truth, intelligence, and intellect of the morally, spiritually, and mentally superior pagan hierophants, like Mary Magdalene, Pythagoras, Quetzalcoatl, the Buddha, and Jesus Christ. In Greek, the double set of stone tablets used by pagan hierophants at initiations during the final mystery are the signettes of the wisdom of the bread, Ceres, and wine, Bacchus, which unite in the fullness of the feminine Greek pleroma. The Christian priests also adopted the serpent scepter of the pagan hierophant, copied his cap from the Hindu Supreme Pontiff, whose unity is represented by Brahma, who is known as a fish charmer, and whose emanation is Krishna, who represents Krishna consciousness, and whose devotees are Christians, whose signet is the fish, and whose cross is formed by two fishes. The Greek word for Christos shares its roots in the same Sanskrit word Chris, which means sacred, as similarly used in the Hindu Krishna. The Hindu infinite singularity called the Atman, the Atman, came to be the Christian Adam man. And as mentioned before, the Hindu unity was called the Brahma, which the Christian priest stole and Frankensteined into Abraham, and turned Christians into Christians. Don't forget, Krishna was born of a virgin, was crucified on a tree, died, and was resurrected 3 days later. Oh, and Osiris. Osiris was also born of a virgin, crucified, died, and was resurrected 3 days later. And Buddha, though he died under a tree. And this is starting to sound familiar to Bacchus, the red blood wine in the Golden Grail god, who was also resurrected and born of a virgin. Quetzalcoatl was also born of a virgin and resurrected. See a pattern emerging? A global universal pattern? All revolving around the central orbit of the serpent? And remember, in Egypt, the petroma or pleroma or petraroma is this hieroglyphic on a stela. This sign, which is the mystical counterpart to the letters and word petra, meaning to show, or the Eye of Horus. And this eye is only open through the trinity of Osiris, Isis, and Thought. Osiris, Christos the wine, Thought, the intellect, the serpent or bread, and Isis, the menstruum or petroma, which opens the Eye of Horus, or the pineal gland, the emerald tablet, or third eye, from which flows the Greek Jesus Christos, or by today's nomenclature, the Jesus Christ, the healing oil, the sacred secretion, the serpent of salvation, the intellect of an enlightened brain. Jesus Christ is the serpentine healing oil of salvation, secreted from the pineal gland, but only after the activation of the pineal gland is flipped to the on switch, which the serpent science of the Ophite staff or Egyptian caduceus, tau, or cross teaches one how to accomplish. The mystical manuscripts of the 1st century in which all this knowledge of Jesus Christ was contained. His countless codexes, amongst which the Maggia Jesu Christi was the only one kept preserved by the priests, who originally initiated him in Koinobi, were eventually burned in the 2nd and 3rd centuries by morally inept Christian vandals as heresy, blasphemy, and magical. Most of it was hidden in the cave temple Jehoshua rose from the valley and preserved in clay pots, and found in the 20th century by a young boy throwing rocks into said cave. And when they were released once more, and for the last time in 363 AD to the Syrian mystery school established by King Iamblichus by the Koinobi priesthood. All traces of the Koinobi, their desert dwellings, temples of initiation, their books and story of their most prominent initiate were destroyed, burnt to the ground, and all mentions in the history books erased yet again. Yet, in the saved manuscript of the Serpent Codex of Jesus Christ, whose mission was to free the sheeple and have a world of shepherds by initiating them in his Maggia Jesu Christi, one of his principal heroes called the Initiate is made to communicate with the Pater through an illuminator. This illuminator or hierophant inhabits a cave as a conduit to this Pater, teaching the multitudes of eager scholars standing outside. The scholar or initiate receives the words of wisdom of the invisible God, the Pater, by applying his ear to a circular hole in a partition which conceals the illuminator, or priest, who then conveys from the potter to the scholar the words of wisdom with explanations and glossaries. He was the deus ex machina, where the presiding but invisible deity, the pater or petra, uttered the divine will to the initiate through a second party, the hierophant or intrapetra, in the Petra Roma, the rock church. The greatest of all the Christian frauds that Christians cling to is also the very rock upon which the dogma of apostolic succession is founded, the bedrock of its existence, and thus its very continuation. Peter the Rock of Rome. It is all a lie. This was the same method used by Pythagoras, who never allowed his students, like Socrates, to see him, but instructed them from behind a curtain in his cave, and misappropriated by the lunatic Christian confessional, with a distinct difference being, it is the hierophant priest confessing the secret knowledge of God to the initiate, not the perverse, crack-brained opposite of a one-sided interrogation. The initiate or scholar was encouraged to debate, interrogate, and ask for clarification as a sign of their independent intellect and power for critical self-thought, while the Christian is a sinner whose truth should be silent and whose voice shall never question the living word of God, which
is the Holy Bible.
The word pater, petra, Peter, locates both master and disciple in the circle of initiation, represented by the triple tau of Christos, Serpent, and Petroma. And the twisted, sick perversion of this is the basis for future Masonic buildings, posing as Christian governments and church centers, which is why they're not taxed, but should be, if not at least banned as cults, which they are, because they're all again used for the spiritual retardation and cognitive sterilization of the masses. More than 2,000 years later, we can now know the truth that whether Jesus was initiated either by the Petra of the Egyptians, the Petra Roma of the Hindus, the Pleroma of the Pythagoreans, or the codex of the Kabbalist Nazarenes, Jesus was undoubtedly, beyond the shadow of a doubt, initiated. Otherwise, he could not have learned of the secret doctrine taught by and only by pagan hierophants. Because the sacred teaching of the Petra of this vignette is the sacred secretion of the Jesus Christ healing oil from the activated pineal gland, accessed only by awakening the inner serpent seed of the Holy Grail with the knowledge of the serpent science, also known as the basis of mesmerism. Because like a cobra, your inner serpent is always being mesmerized. But there comes an age when you discover that you have a choice, the power to choose you or reject you. Because you are either being mesmerized by you, your dreams, visualizations, scripting, hopes, and aspirations. And if you shy away from this knowledge, are convinced it is evil, or deny it entirely, then you will never know the power that comes from taming and mesmerizing your own inner cobra, and the power of its venom to dissolve the veil of reality society has already mesmerized you with. Because that is the power of no longer denying, but befriending your inner serpent. It dissolves the lies and fallacies, and like venom to muscles, the body of society's lies die. Which alludes to the power of Jesus Christ's favorite saying, "Be ye wise as serpents." This is the knowledge of the apple of the tree of knowledge, the Kabbalist tree, the tree of life, the caduceus, the serpent staff, the cross, all one and the same, born from the tetragrammaton, which is your mind and the mind of God, and thus, the only God you need is the gray matter in your brain. All of which is knowledge called by the ignorant, dumb, and easily prone to violence as the forbidden fruit of the serpent of damnation. Like the illuminator in this early 1st century BCE manuscript attributed to Jehoshua, we find Jehoshua selecting a mystery appellation for one who is made to be the interpreter of the will of Christos, the first emanation, and that illuminator Jehoshua calls Petra, who was most likely meant to be John the Baptist, but who was beheaded to prevent exactly this. And he was only second to the first, the true Petra, the true chosen pope of Jehoshua, Mary of Magdala, who was, well, for lack of better words, #MeToo'd. Emphatically obvious is that the Apostle Peter was never ever in Rome proper either. The Christian Church chose as her titular founder the cowardly character of the apostle who 3 times denied his master at the haunting moment of danger, and the only one moreover, except for Judas, who provoked Jesus Christ in such a way as to be addressed as the enemy, declaring, "Cast thee behind me, Satan." When frightened at the accusation of being the servant of the high pagan priest known as Jesus Christ, the apostle Peter thrice denied his master, and Jesus Christ said to him, "Verily I say unto thee, Peter, and by extension every self-proclaimed Christian out there today, thou shalt deny me throughout the coming ages, and never stop until thou shalt be old, and shalt stretch forth thy hands, and another shall gird thee, and carry thee whither thou wouldst not." Which simply means that Jesus Christ prophesied exactly how the Christian churches born of Rome would constantly sin against Jesus Christ, the true redeemer of the great brain matter within, under the mask of a false religion whose Jehovistic Godhead was to Jesus Christ, an evil thuggish serpent mafia crime boss, phallus and ball, and prophesied like a true prophet, Jesus did, as if totally perverting the true knowledge of the Jesus Christ, and secreting its true meaning away was not enough of a slap to Jesus' true mission. The Christian Church and every one of its Christian followers ever since then, of the petty Jehovah Adonai, put Jesus Christ's greatest and self-proclaimed enemy at the head of their church, found dead on lies and deceit, in essence, objectively making the Christian Church the de facto enemies of their own Jesus Christ Redeemer. Finally, Jesus Christ was captured after being deceived by Judas Iscariot, who romantically loved Jesus and betrayed him as a stilted lover, jealous of Mary of Magdala. Jesus loved and accepted Judas, who was persecuted for his homosexuality, and though he wore his red hair long, as was the tradition of the women and men of the Nazarenes, he wore it femininely, just like Mary, Jehoshua's chosen. Yet Judas was openly and intimately loved, accepted, uplifted, enabled, and protected by Jesus and his growing fellowship. In the singular act is the purity of Jehoshua's love in its radical acceptance and supreme indifference of others, of just live and let live, because we are all just God in God. Judas concocted a trap to ensure Jehoshua could not simply fly away, entrapping him in the cave formed in the Pythagorean spirit, on top of the mountain from which he preached his many sermons. After ensuring Jehoshua was within the cave, and behind the curtain to act as the intra-petra, per the Maggia Jesu Christi procedural, and thus could not simply fly away, Jehoshua was arrested, fixed with a crown of thorns, which pierced his skin down to the skull, creating so much mental static to disturb the proper functioning of his mind. Thus, his pineal gland, in the gray matter of his brain. Then he was thrown in prison by the nascent Jewish state and kept there in solitary confinement for 40 days, then flogged as a seditious rebel, then stoned as a blasphemer, and in true Rasputin style, did not expire. Then, he was tied up to a heavy wooden cross with iron shackles that prevented him from flying away, which he carried to the place where they crucified him, and finally allowed to expire upon the cross at the age of 78 after obscene physical torture to counteract the powerful self-healing forces of the sacred cerebrospinal secretion. The fishy oil or serpent venom called the Jesus Christ, flowing between Jehoshua's pineal gland emerald tablet and Holy Grail along the channels of his spine, all because he revealed to the people these truths of this knowledge or magic of the serpent science of pineal gland activation, which the high priest wished to bury and conceal for their own use, to abuse their herds of sheeple to this day. There are clearly two separate distinct backgrounds to the man Jehosuah Ben Nazaria, and the true historical figure was occulted, then perverted, dismembered, all truth filtered out, and Frankenstein into the newborn Constantine faith to overrule and dominate the masses, because no matter who wields the true Jesus Christ teaching, the power which remains unchanged is mesmerism. And they don't teach that in church, though it is exactly what is being practiced, not by the masses, but upon the masses. And that is the perversion. Because mesmerism is the most paramount truth at the core of the Jesus Christ serpent science. But Christians don't practice, much less believe in it, but outright demonize it. For the founders and perpetrators of the Christian faith, the greatest dilemma was, is, and always will be, why allow others to know the truth and practice it, when, if you are a power-hungry murderer like, let's say, Constantine, it would benefit you greatly if you directed this secret power of mesmerism at the core of the Jesus Christ serpent science upon those whom you desired to dominate, rob them of the true power, make it illicit, taboo, the forbidden fruit, while using said power upon them. They occulted the truth, perverted it, commodified it, filtered out the truth of mesmerism entirely, and, through oceans of blood spilled and used to ink the annals of the history of the last 2,000 years, the world is bent to the knee with the rusted sword of circumcision upon its neck. Mesmerized by the spells of the Christian cult, it is what every priest does to every Christian every Sunday service. Mesmerize. And this is true for the follower of each religion born from the Jerusalem line of the devil demon, Jehovah Adonai. Jehoshua had divined the occult theology of the Kabbalah of Israel, the cubical stone and crescent moon of Islam, the Jewish Star of David, the Egyptian Tau cross, and the ineffable name of God, the tetragrammaton, had supplemented it with the secret serpent science of the Koinobi, Ophites in Egypt, mesmerism, and found thereby the roots of a universal, primordial, and eternal religion, secret knowledge he wanted to take from occult to revealed. But for his altruist mission of a world of shepherds, Jehoshua died on the cross. Mary of Magdala and his mother Mary never once left his side, waiting for the last breath and heartbeat with focused anticipation, because the second he did so, they alerted the guards to, please let them take him down. Upon receiving his body, they wrapped it and escorted it back to the Petra Roma, the true rock church Jehosuah had risen from the valley. The reason for this comes directly from his own Serpent Science Codex of the Maggia Jesu Christi, which explained how resurrection is mesmerism in the void, known as the Hall of Judgment. The only door which opens this hall is death, and one's consciousness remains in this hall of judgment between the exhale of the last breath and the death of the original seed of life, from the moment of insemination and prior to mitosis, which never ceases to exist until rigor mortis sets in, about 24 hours after that last breath is exhaled. Both Marys knew they had to act quickly to remove and patch all of the punctures and blood wounds from some of the most important energy channels in the body and pressure points upon the crown of the head, so that he could, in the void, between the last breath and rigor mortis 24 hours later, regain control. Because what also happens upon the last breath is all of the energy currents of the body conjoin in the pineal gland, which begins to replay one's entire life, which happens involuntarily and without one's control. At the end of this replay of one's life story, the memory-wiping white light of resurrection appears, and like taking off old clothes, discards the old body to be reborn into a new bodysuit, according to your karma. However, if you are well practiced, as Jehosuah was in mesmerism and the serpent chakra science, you can regain control over your pineal gland, remembering this retelling of your life is just another veil of reality, because you are aware you died. So, you have the option to choose: be reincarnated or resurrected. And why would you choose reincarnation? Many have their reasons. Or, instead, you can regain control of your pineal gland by veering your mind to focus on the body parts associated with each chakra, which is done the same way by amateurs and masters, by envisioning the colors, the tones, powers, shapes, planets, etc., associated with each, which, instead of the memory-wiping white light of reincarnation, the rainbow bridge of Asgard shines before you, or, as the Buddhists teach, becomes the rainbow body. The Mexicans, the radiant rainbow serpent Quetzalcoatl, or the Chinese fiery lion-headed Paichu, or the fire-breathing dragon, or the cosmic neon serpent tribes in the Amazon commune with through ayahuasca ceremonies. Many individuals in our current sixth race have obviously resurrected, except when Jehosuah did, he showcased the magnitude of his awakened inner serpent, because when he reconnected with, reignited, and thus reactivated every chakra, he not only connected with those within himself, but their planetary counterparts, drawing their forces to him. And when he did self-resurrect, the sound of 7 trumpets blared from the heavens above and earth below, one for every time the fire of a chakra turned back on, and every time the planetary counterpart in the heavens rang like a trumpet, sending waves of sound emanations like ripples across the celestial menstruum, causing Earth to tilt her axis, thereby effectively changing the course tracked by all the planets, including the central sun, along the celestial backdrop of the stars and constellations. The aura of Jehoshua's resurrected heart chakra was said to be the strongest, looking from the front like a flaming heart, and from the back The energetic charge was so strong it peaked to a tip, like the fin of a dolphin. And Jehoshua was called Jesu le Dauphin, or Jesus the Dolphin, whose celestial correspondence is Cetus, the Great Cetacean. An apropos constellation, as the Jesus Christ is also only secreted from an activated pineal gland, is described as a fishy, oily substance, as much as the serpent's venom. And cetaceans, like whales and dolphins, are known to have exceptionally massive pineal glands filled with the same type of cerebrospinal oil. The 7 reactivated chakras in Jehoshua, whose planetary correspondences reign, like trumpets sending sound waves across the heavenly menstruum, coalesced on Earth, forming a new grid of consciousness called Christ consciousness. As a consequence, the sun no longer traces the mainstream path across the 12 constellations of equal 30-degree lengths and 30 days across 360 days, called the zodiac, Vedic, or sidereal codifications of the heavens, which represent the old Krishna Buddha grid. With the new Christ grid, since Jehoshua's resurrection to this day, the sun snakes through 13 signs of varying lengths, with 5 days added to the year for a total of 365, into the following astronomical chart to add Ophiuchus, the snake handler, and the Ophite serpent key of self-mesmerism, essential to unlocking Christ consciousness, and who was the constellation corresponding to the snake wrapped around Krishna's head. Cetus figures prominently in this new Christ grid, as Uranus, Neptune, Jupiter, and Mercury all pass through this constellation as well. Mercury's path also shifted to pass through 15 signs total, one of them Cetus, typically around Easter time, or the time of Jehoshua's resurrection, in March or April, and the others, Orion and Ophiuchus. As Saturnalia and Christmas by extension was a pagan ritual about pineal gland activation, based on serpent knowledge, and effectively a declaration of independence and freedom from the evil Jehovah phallus and Baal. And Jehoshua represents this as the new herald of the Jesus Christ consciousness. The sun now passes through Capricorn, who marked the Saturnalia feasts not on December 20th, but for the last 2,000 years now, begins on January 20th, which marks the date Jehoshua was captured, and, appropriately, the new start for Capricorn and Saturnalia. His arrest was mourned by his fellowship, with an ashen cross upon their foreheads on the first Wednesday, when a whole lunar cycle had passed into Aquarius, called Ash Wednesday, which in Greek was Mercury, named after Mercury, the planet of the enlightened mind, defined by pineal gland activation. He was crucified and died on the Tau, or the cross, represented by 2 snakes, or 2 fish, which are the one and same 2 fishes of Pisces, which is also the constellation corresponding to Krishna, who was also crucified and later resurrected. As the sun passes Pisces around these states, Mercury passes Cetus. For 2,000 years, humanity has been robbed of this true heritage of astronomy under the false guise of the baselessly continued astrology, the zodiac, or the Vedic sidereal, which expired 2,000 years ago. But to keep the lie going, they mistakenly correct for the natural precession of the stars, antithetical to the astronomical art of star map reading of the ancients, who created the whole concept of astrology to begin with. The correction for the natural precession is unnatural, artificial, false, and an outright and very real conspiracy theory, aimed at the literal misdirection and mis-self-identification of the masses, to do what Christians love to do: sever the ties that connect humans to their divinity. This is the new astronomy based on Christo's Serpent science, or Maggia Jesu Christi, to replace the old Vedic Hindu sidereal zodiac, meant for the next step of human evolution through the activation of the pineal gland, which harmonizes in one, the mortal human, with the immortal divine. The following information will test even the most open-minded of viewers, challenging some to the core, while possibly giving the missing piece long searched for by others. Proceed with caution. You have been forewarned. Judas was meant to be Jehoshua's testament of love and acceptance for homosexuality, and the spectrum of sexuality, which is one of the occult forces of God, or the first cause. Like the spectrum of heat, or masculine, and cold, the feminine. Sexuality is a spectrum from homosexuality, masculine, to asexuality, feminine, wherein heterosexuality is a blurry middle ground, and the most individualized from God. Thus, the most furthest apart and separated from the unity, which is where the meaning of hetero comes from, opposite, to whom or what? To God. Because as the closer you get to God, the more homogeneous things become. God is a homogeneous, indivisible unity, trans-androgynous, and homosexuality is thus less individualized, less separate from God, because it represents the androgyne sexuality, which returns back to itself, establishing infinity, becoming immortal, thus graduating from the reincarnation cycle. In fact, everything exists in a spectrum: light, color, gender. It is all a mere directional and distance relationship to the other. Just don't do two things: impose yourself on someone else without consent, or conform others to your will. Those are actually universal to everything in life. Because no matter how far a heteronormative emanation is from the homogeneous God, it is still just God being God in God. Reincarnation is sorrow and needs heterosexuals, and homosexuals in this lifetime may have been heterosexuals in previous incarnations, but are presented with a distinct opportunity in this one to finally graduate and leave the school of the universe called Earth, or Gaia. It was Jehoshua's plan for Judas to be the patron saint of homosexuals and heterosexuals, as a representative of one of the occult natures and forces of God called sexuality. But sadly, Judas betrayed Jehoshua, and by extension, homosexuals and heterosexuals of the higher and purer wisdom they could have received from the homosexual. 30 silver pieces is a very small price to pay compared to the endless lives that should have been saved and enriched, along with Jehoshua, the master, pagan hierophant, gay advocate, and true but occulted leader of Christians. And that is a true story of Jehosuah Ben Nazaria, who was melanated, an immigrant, and pagan, who ate from and relished in the serpent's forbidden fruit of the tree of knowledge, the Jesus Christ, as revealed in the ancient Koinobi books that form the secret wisdom of Freemasonry and compiled with all its truth filtered out into the diabolical and evil New Testament. One is a narrative of love, magic, flying, superpowers, radical love of self and others. That Jehoshua did preach on homosexuality and openly affirmed and accepted it. That he unequivocally rebuked, in plain defiant terms, the Holy Bible and its lowercase god, known by the names Jehovah, Adonai, Yahweh, the Ildaboath, the demon serpent, the phallic god and Baal, the devil. That Christians are actually copycat sloppy second, defecated and acid-riddled, regurgitated gut mud Hindus worshipping Krishna. But while their unity Brahma is true, the Christian patriarchal hegemon, Abraham, is nothing but a lowly psychotic bitter man, bent on murder any chance his demon Baal, devil Yahweh, commands it. That Jesus Christ is the fish oil, or serpent venom secreted from the pineal gland through radical self-love and supreme indifference of others, like God. That you yourself are an emanation of God, and the mind of God is this, the tetragrammaton, which is also your mind. And as above, so below, well too, as within, so without, and thus, why you yourself are not just made of stardust, but are a literal five-pointed star being, innately knew how to draw a star since childhood without being taught how to, and understanding this knowledge is akin to knowing God. So be yourself, your truest, most authentic, taboo, rebellious, anti-status quo true self, because Jehosuah Ben Nazaria was too. Be wise as serpents, know you are gods, mesmerize yourself, spell out your hopes, visions, dreams, aspirations, and meditate upon them, because while knowledge is power, intellect is superior to knowledge, but meditation is superior to intellect. In meditation, you unite the tetragrammaton of your human physical and divine mental aspects, and not only mesmerize yourself, but effectively make a declaration of independence for your free will, of not denying or killing your inner serpent or fire-breathing dragon or rainbow iridescent winged dragon angel, but taming it, befriending it, loving it, making you what the ancients called a lion's head, a tiger amongst men. And when you're a lion or a tiger, the sheeple can love or hate you without a care from you, because God is radical acceptance and supreme indifference. And if you find this occult version of Jehoshua's and Jesus Christ's story hard to believe, that's fine. Ask questions, but at least ask them. And if you are in agreement, all I can say is dream, because God is right there dreaming too. And you have God behind you, above you, below you, in front of you, to the right and left of you, inside of you and outside of you. So let no small-minded Christian meat bag filled with gut mud where a brain should be in a lump of coal instead of a flaming heart stop you. All I am doing is presenting facts, and if you believe there is an agenda for queer misleading information here, then you have no clue what true propaganda looks like, because I have literally been blowing the casket on that mess. So do with it what you want. I can't care any less. And until next time, trust and believe that it is okay to be you, the most beautiful you there ever was, there is, and that there ever will be, because you are not a story that can be told twice. And there will never again be a stage for you to perform but this one, right here, right now. So be you, the most beautiful you.